Hello, everybody. My portion of the panel today is titled From Turtle Island to Palestine, Occupation is a Crime. It is a slogan that we've been shouting at the top of our lungs for the entirety of my activist kind of public-facing life as someone who's lived in so-called Canada for 15 years before moving here to Porto. And that puts me in a somewhat unique position in which I got to question the concept of decolonization from different kind of angles. Being in the Americas, having a lot of independent countries where indigenous people are not actually in control, raises the question of independence for who? And raises the question of the legitimacy of borders, of course, and the nation state as a concept that we still need or that we ever needed, to be honest. As a Palestinian activist, I am often faced with the question, do you think that Israel has the right to exist? And my answer is always, does any state have the right to exist? I don't personally think so. I think people have the right to exist. And my aim in this segment is to kind of outline a little bit of what colonialism looks like, which will therefore inform what I believe and what it's not just my thoughts, of course. I am drawing from a myriad of other scholars and activists and community workers on what we think the future can look like and how we can go about decolonization in a way that is productive, that is inclusive, and that is fair for all. So some of the points that I would like to touch on are the material realities of living under occupation and under colonialism, and the different kinds that colonialism takes place, right? So we have two kind of, to be reductive and for the sake of time, two big kinds of colonialism. We have the extractive one, which is what we see in a lot of places where the countries who are powerful, the, again, so-called global north, I don't know about these terms, but they're useful because we mostly understand what we mean. Extracts from the so-called global south, and then we have settler colonialism, which is a completely different beast. It seeks to destroy and replace. Destroy what's been there, replace it with something that is different. Not surprisingly, that something that is different is usually kind of in the image of Europe a little bit, or a lot bit actually. And so it is important to recognize what settler colonialism does, right? It is a very real, very material thing that indigenous people have to contend with in their day-to-day lives. It is not a metaphor, obviously, as Eve Tuck and Yang have told us, two indigenous scholars from Turtle Island. And here are some ways where in Palestine these material realities manifest. Yeah? So there are Of course, the obvious one, the elephant in the room, land theft, the Nakba, the Naksa, the ongoing genocide and resettlement of Gaza, the Trump project to make it into his own image, Mediterranean Mar-a-Lago. We have water theft, where 85% of water in Palestine is directly given to places that are majority Jewish, whether they are settlements or so-called illegal settlements in the West Bank. I think any place is illegal settlements from the river to the sea. Or whether it's in what we call in Arabic, the interior. And food sovereignty, right? Which brings me to feminism. So there are many ways in which food sovereignty and feminism intersect. But I will start before that by pointing to other ways that colonialism and settler colonialism especially affects women in ways that are very sexist and very specific. So in Palestine, women under occupation are facing a lot of reproductive health restraints that are very deliberate to win a sort of a demographic war. So to kind of illustrate this point, I do want to do a very brief history lesson and go back to the first Prime Minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, who said that he would like to see an Israel where 80% at least of people are Jewish. So that number continues to more or less be accurate outside of the West Bank and Gaza. So the Palestinians who live within what the United Nations would not call an illegal occupation are approximately 20%, just as Ben-Gurion envisioned. And to get to that number, we got the Nakba, where Palestinians were displaced, forcibly so, where Palestinians were massacred, and where we saw many documented instances of gender-based violence that are enacted on Palestinian women's bodies by the settler occupier force. Sorry, I am a little bit giggling because it's absurd, but these instances are documented by Palestinians, obviously, but when it comes to Palestine, for racist reasons, people usually value and listen more closely to the voices of foreigners, and especially if they are Israelis, talking about the Palestinian experience. So let me give you some quotes. Here is Benny Morris, who is considered to be a leftist. In Israel, that means nothing, as you will see. Where he's one of the people who actually did document the sexual violence that was enacted upon Palestinian women during the Nakba. In 2004, he gave an interview to Hearts in which he says, "I feel sympathy for the refugees." He was talking about the Nakba at the time. "I feel sympathy for the refugees themselves, but if the desire is to establish a Jewish state here is legitimate, there was no other choice." Leftist, by the way, we love that, okay. Even the great American democracy could not have been created without the annihilation of the Indians. Amazing. There are cases in which the overall final good justifies the harsh and cruel acts that are committed in the course of history. So, leftists in Israel is this, basically. He talks a little bit more about how David Ben-Gurion did not do a really good job, because if he actually did go for the 100% instead of the 80%, then there would be so much less suffering in Palestine today. Excellent. So now, earlier Zionist thinkers were a lot more honest about their project. And here I would like to point a specific one out, whose name is Zev Jakubtinsky. Sorry. They don't usually make an effort to pronounce our names right, so I'm kind of okay messing up their names. So this is the year 1923. He wrote two essays that are kind of like seminal works in Zionist ideology. They are called The Iron Wall, and then a week later he wrote another essay, less known, less quoted, called The Morality of the Iron Wall. So, he says that, he suggests that my reader, his reader, consider all the precedents with which they are acquainted and see whether there are one solitary instance of any colonization being carried on with the consent of the native population. There is no such precedence. I wonder why. Colonization carries its own explanation, the only possible explanation, unalterable and as clear as daylight to every ordinary Jew and every ordinary Arab. Colonialization can only have one aim, and Palestine Arabs, that is Palestinians, they don't like to call us that, cannot accept this aim. Wonder why? It lies in the very nature of things, and in this particular regard, nature cannot be changed. He goes on to say that we cannot offer any adequate compensation for Arabs to give us Palestine, Arabs being Palestinians. Again, why, how could there be? And so we just have to disregard what they want and find a so-called iron wall, which will help us and have our backs while we bulldoze, quite literally, our way to Palestine. At the time, he thought that iron wall would be the United Kingdom because of the Balfour Promise. Look it up if you're not familiar. It's not, it's the US, unfortunately, for us. So this is kind of to illustrate what colonization, what settler colonization is. Early Zionist thinkers were very clear, were very aware of what they're doing, right? The best they can hope for is that the often quoted quotation that the old will die and the young will forget 70-something, almost 88 years later, we haven't. Surprise. Just like the indigenous people of North America haven't forgotten either their disposition and their the struggles that they face and the violence that they face under the settler colonialism projects of Canada and the US and the rest of them, Australia, New Zealand, you name it. So, that's my first point. I think we kind of get what settler colonialism is now. So let's talk about feminism and where it fits into all of this. There are many ways in which feminism and feminist issues fit in our discussion of decolonization. Unfortunately, not all of them are glowing examples of what real liberation looks like. We have the examples of the many studies published about gender-based violence, which only for some reason are enacted on Palestinian women, somehow by Palestinian men. Meanwhile, we as Palestinians, and anyone who's following the news, we know that women's reproductive health is a huge issue in Palestine, and it is not because of Palestinian men, it is because of Israel. In between 2000 and 2005, and these numbers have gone off the rocker because that's like the one number that I could find. 36 newborn, okay, 2000 and 2005. At the time, relative calm, okay? And this is the West Bank, not Gaza. 36 newborn infants died at checkpoints in the West Bank because Palestinian women, especially those in labor, are forcibly held and denied health care and denied access to hospitals. 25%, and this is, I believe, a B'Tselem report, 25% of women are at risk of death during labor in Gaza. And this was, I believe, before the blockade. Let me double check. Yes, it was. That was before the blockade of 2017. Very good. Let's keep going. Rape has been part and parcel of the way that the Israeli colonial project conducts itself and weaponizes it in one, to traumatize women, obviously, and two, to kind of create this stigma around people. They're like, oh, these Palestinians, they only care about honor and whatever, because they do not understand who we are. It's amazing that you can colonize a country and subjugate its people and still not understand quite how they work or how they see things, but they're like, oh, we know what will hurt them the most. It's if we rape their sisters and mothers. And it's like, okay, dude, clearly you haven't met a lot of Palestinians and talked to them, because we've known that this is a tool that you use against us, and we kind of have moved past that in 1948, but okay. Now, reproductive health is something that we see the colonial project in Canada used against Indigenous people as well. It's a very clear parallel. There are documented cases of forced sterilization of Indigenous women without their consent or knowledge. There are many instances of women being denied health care because of how Canada is set up, where there are, I don't know if this is interesting to people, but there are provinces, there are territories, and provinces and territories have the mandate to take care of, to do health care. And so it becomes kind of like a legal hot potato of who should actually do the health care that's necessary for women to survive and be healthy. And that leads to a lot of people not being able to survive childbirth as well. Now, we also have, and here comes white feminism, right? Saying that, like, oh, it's the problem with Palestinian women is that they're repressed by their Palestinian men instead of by the systems that oppress them. Indigenous women are oppressed by their so-called unemployed, whatever stereotypes they give Indigenous men. And another kind of jarring example that I think about often is in Algeria, while it was colonized under French occupation. French women, not men, women, were pulling off the hijabs off of Algerian women to free them, while French women at the time did not have the right to vote or open bank accounts in France. So this is kind of the bad side of feminism. This is the white feminism that we don't like. Now let's talk about the feminism that we actually do like, yeah? Women have, and especially in Palestine, have been very often, the majority of the time, the sole breadwinners in their family. They do a lot of the work that is coded as masculine. They do a lot of the work that is not necessarily as glamorous as armed resistance, which we tend to glorify more than the care work that sustains that armed resistance. And we see kind of the flip side of that as well in Israel, where while they were bombing Tehran, they were co-opting the feminist line that women in Tehran have been shouting during protests, women, life, freedom, with pictures of beautiful European-looking blonde ladies bombing Tehran, as though their bombs would discriminate between men and women as they bombed their neighborhoods and their families. Now, where does that take us? I think the only way forward is something that we are already doing, luckily, and it is building these links between our shared struggles. We are no longer, or we can no longer say that as a Palestinian, I'm in solidarity with Black Americans, or I'm in solidarity with indigenous people of Turtle Island. I am in a shared struggle with them. You cannot be in solidarity with yourself. you are in a shared struggle. And this has been more and more evident to people, especially in the past couple years with the onslaught of the genocide in Gaza. I think the Overton window has shifted tremendously in what you can and cannot say, to the point where the former speechwriter for Obama and Hillary Clinton a couple of days ago went on in a conference in a room much like this one, and she said, back in the day, if you wanted to learn about world news, you had to go to a little weird bookshop and find it. And now, young people are bombarded with the images and the onslaught of the bad things that happen there. And her problem is that people know more. It's that they're not controlling the narrative as much as they used to. And this is also why you see in the past couple of years such a tremendous push, especially in the United States, but not just in the United States. We see it in the UK. We see it in Canada. Hopefully we won't see it here, because I do love that you can download anything in Portugal. Piracy is excellent here, would recommend. But it is something that we see the effect of almost immediately on all parties that do not seem to agree on anything. They're like, oh, no, we have to rein back social media. We have to ban TikTok and then unban it and then play with the algorithms and then try to sell it to someone who is on our side and who will protect our narrative and push it forward, right? That's why Benjamin Netanyahu had a meeting with freaking influencers, and he said weapons vary from era to era, and now one of the greatest weapons that you can have is social media. Like, okay, dude. And it's because you're seeing this kind of boomerang effect, right? The so-called Gaza effect, where people have seen the commonalities, between our shared struggles. And so you are no longer in solidarity with Palestinians. You see yourself in their struggle. Now, that does translate in real time, of course, in material ways as well, right? So in Standing Rock, during, I don't know I don't know how people are attuned to like what goes on in Turtle Island, I'm sorry. But during Standing Rock, when there was an extractive project that went through indigenous lands, there were a lot of people who were putting their bodies on the line. A lot of them are women, a lot of delegations from different groups who, again, share the struggle, not in solidarity with, going there. And there was a baby born there to an indigenous woman who wrapped her baby in a kufiyah, right? And you see these links between collectives like the Red Nation Collective, which is an indigenous collective in Turtle Island that is dedicated to decolonization, who explicitly state that decolonization does include Hawaii, does include Palestine, does include New Zealand. We cannot have it if it does not include all of us. Right? We see it with the solidarity links between Palestinians in Palestine and BLM. The BLM protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in in North America, in Turtle Island, where there was a lot of buzz about how Palestinians were sharing tips on how to handle tear gas, how to make barricades, how to resist in real physical ways, through social media. Because the weapons that they use are the same that they use in Palestine. Palestine is the laboratory for the military-industrial complex. And just as the fascist kind of colonial boomerang effect happened where European countries did atrocities abroad and then did them to their own people, and people were surprised, same thing is happening with the military-industrial complex, right? But these links between African Americans or Black people in the US and Palestinians extend way before that too. We see that with James Baldwin, bell hooks. In fact, I would like to share something that bell hooks wrote. If I can find it, yes. She says, feminism cannot be selective. It's a framework that comes from, its framework comes from the absolute liberation, not just for women, but for all people. This is why Zionism and feminism cannot merge, right? And so these solidarities networks have been established way long before social media, back when you had to go to the weird little bookstores that we've been hearing about lately. And so just to wrap things up, I think the decolonization not being a metaphor means land back to indigenous people everywhere. I believe that if we are to survive climate change, if we are to survive as a species, forget thrive, forget live in a fair society. If we want to survive, the future needs to be indigenous. Because indigeneity is being attuned to the land. Indigeneity is sharing seeds across borders in a way that is sustainable. Indigeneity is freedom of movement that is respectful, that is attuned to where you are. It does not mean that you are shackled to wherever your ancestral homeland is. It means that your worldview is not short-sighted, because you have that link that links you back to your ancestors, that makes you see the future beyond the next quarter profit. I would like to end by mentioning something that I learned from indigenous people in Turtle Island, and it is the 7 generations rule. It's something that we kind of thank you for the smiley face. I have 1 minute. It's something that resonated with me, and that I hope will resonate with you as well. And it is, whenever you conduct yourself in the universe, think 7 generations behind and 7 generations ahead. If that thing does not align with this vision of what your ancestors would have done, what world you wish your descendants to live in, then just don't do it. Easy peasy, okay? And what I don't want to see is a world that continues to be fragmented, that continues to be oppressive, that continues to be extractive and that continues to use women as a tool of repression, as a means to oppress not just women, but men and children and the elderly and the non-binary and the queer. So that's my vision for my 7 generations ahead and before. Thank you so much.